Well, hi everyone. Just made you wait just a little bit for that, a bit of sense of anticipation. It is my huge pleasure to be here with all of you today to chat with four just legendary humans, to steal from Phoebe just now, to talk about a topic that I'm super passionate about, and I think actually a lot of you are as well, which is how can companies have impact on the world? And in particular, how can they think about that in new and unexpected ways? So please join with me in introducing to the stage four great people: Flavia from Fleet, Aengus from Harrison.ai, Alex from XY Sense, and Leah from Google. Well, welcome everyone. So, we are here today to talk about the ways in which businesses are having positive impact on the world in ways that you may not be expecting. And I thought one of the first things that we might do is actually just start with the basics. Can I ask each of you to introduce yourselves and in one or two lines, describe for the audience at a high level what your business does? Let's start with you, Alex.
Hey everyone, so I'm Alex from XY Sense. We focus on the intersection of people and place, and we help large organizations better understand how they're using their offices. And we have a privacy-first sensor that we've built and designed in-house that feeds into our cloud analytics platform, and we make recommendations on how offices can be better and how people can be more effective. And offices around the world right now are pretty underutilized, and we're certainly able to help make that a little bit more transparent on how they can be better.
Leah will bring you all across the line.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Kaplan. I work for Google Cloud. I am the APAC Geospatial Analytics lead and also the sustainability lead. So what that means is I spend time talking to customers about how we can use technology to meet sustainability goals.
My name is Flavia. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a space company called Fleet Space Technologies. At Fleet, we are building very advanced microsatellites in low Earth orbit to solve very big problems on Earth, such as the critical minerals boom and looking under the ground for lithium and all the interesting things that you're going to discover in this panel.
Hi guys, my name is Dr. Aengus Tran. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Harrison.ai. We're based here in Sydney. What we do is to build AI tools for doctors to help scale the global capacity of healthcare. And we build technology in many areas, including radiology, so looking at things like X-ray and CT of the brain, and help doctors identify critical cases and improve the diagnostic accuracy, but also in other areas like pathology. And our mission is to participate in and improve the quality of care for 1 million patients every day through a collective reach of all the AI algorithm that we have developed. Very nice to be here today and talk about this very pressing topic.
Okay, so you can see we've got space tech, we've got prop tech, we've got health tech, and Google, which is kind of everything these days, right?
All the techs.
So specifically, we wanted to put this panel together to sort of challenge some of the notions around impact. Some of you might also suffer from a challenge that I think I face, which is that we have a tendency to sometimes think about impact as sort of holier than thou. It sort of tends to be like you're either an impact company and you're saving the world every single day, or you're something else. And actually what we're interested in today is to play in the wonderful world between those two places and actually sort of probe at this idea that every business in different ways, big and small, can make efforts to have a more positive impact on the world around them. And in particular, one of the things that we wanted to sort of frame today's session about was actually taking from other parts of businesses. So if we think about like how you build product, right? Nobody builds product thinking you need to go from 0 to 100 in one go. You build iteratively and you make experiments and you try things and they fail and you learn from each of those, and over time you get to product market fit if you're lucky. And we do the same thing with go-to-market strategy, and we do the same thing with how we think about sales motions. And what we want to talk about today is the ways in which these four people are taking that same iterative, pragmatic approach to thinking about how they can have impact through their businesses and what they've learned along the way, the things that have been hard and the things that they have been able to benefit from as a result. So I'd like to start actually with you, Flavia. And you prefaced this earlier. I don't think most people, when they hear space tech and mining, think, ooh, this is a high impact company. I'd love you to talk to me a little bit about how impact plays a role in what you do at Fleet and how it's built up as part of your go-to-market strategy.
So I'm going to try to be fast because it's a long founder journey of 39 years, plus 7 with Fleet. But
You started founding when you were 0?
it was starting inside me. But that's the good conversation that we had. Impact is in the soul. So we had this conversation for the past couple of weeks. So it's hard to explaining people how to do impact or how you have done it. So I think the best way to explain it to you is tell you a little bit of a story. So I'm a space rocket scientist. Space has always been in my soul. And the other side of the apple is that I am very, very well aware of climate change, a bit of an activist, I have to say. I'm a scientist. So I know where the world is going, and I know what we are doing to it. I love humankind, I love what we can achieve, but I know that humans are exploiters. So we were having this conversation, and it's a very complex topic, because we try to innovate, and we want to have impact, but we don't think 20 years ahead. We live in a very special time where impact is recognized. So when I started Fleet, Fleet was the idea of building this satellite constellation that kind of changing completely the size of the satellites and the dynamics could kind of leverage satellite data worldwide. It's amazing to look at Earth from the top. You know, I was reading an article this morning that the United Nations, they've got 167 sustainability goals in all the departments of impact you can imagine of. And a study said that 65 of them, so probably more than 1/3, can be solved with space tech. Because guys, space is up there. So, you know, one of my satellites see all Earth 4 times a day. So when you think of global scale problems, it's connected, right? So let's assume that space can have impacts and can have impacts with, you know, disaster management and water management and people and healthcare, security, access, all the things that are important for humankind. How on earth did I get into mining? So I'm going to be very honest. When I arrived in Australia, it was 10 years ago, I knew that mining was a very profound industry in this country, and I didn't like it because it's an industry that I think needs to evolve, that is under a lot of pressure, they don't always make good choices, and it's the industry in the middle of a storm, you know, the oil and gas industry and the mining industry, right? When we started building the satellites and we were looking for something really meaningful, mining was my last thoughts. But then you realize something. You realize that, we were saying this just now, you can't stop the world all at once. You know, you can't stop people destroying things or, you know, drilling all over the world or using Earth as the fuel for everything. You cannot just switch it off like this. But you can help. So if you have funders who cares, you can help. So long story short, I got fascinated by one article really inspired me that was saying that 5,000 drill holes have been done to this our planet in the past 10 years, 5 million drill holes. Oof. Just 5% found something. And because of the energy transition, we need to find 40 times more lithium and copper. So literally, we're trying to help Earth to go to net zero by drilling the planet. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it's an uncommon story, right?
And it's common. This is what we were saying, that humankind, we're good. We want to do good. And we invent amazing things. And we're like, yeah, we want an EV. We want batteries. We want solar panels to solve the energy crisis. And by the way, we need 40 times more lithium and 3 times more copper. And by the way, we need to do 5 million drill holes every 10 years. It is a hard problem to solve, to take care of billion peoples, right? So long story short, I said, let's find a tool to help this industry instead of fighting them. You know, that's what our founders do. Our founders try to change the status quo. So we are now using our satellites, as the doctor says, with the biggest X-ray on Earth, you know, using satellites to map everything on the Earth for 2-3 kilometers. And we're giving tools to mining companies to go to the growth that they deserve to go through and looking for the things that we deserve to have. And we are seeing an 80 to 90% reduction of drilling. That is good. And this is impact to me.
Yeah, and if you unpack that, there's actually a lot of reasons why that matters. There's less land clearing associated with futile mining, not to mention the drill holes themselves.
There is so much. And there is everything that it was easy to find has been found. So we are looking 300, 400 meters down. So there is land access, deforestation, there is landowners, there is sacred land places.
Yep.
And there is simply not doing things if they're not necessary, right?
Yep.
And it's a big problem. So when I stumble on this problem, I realize if you are so lucky to be a founder of a tech startup, and if you're so lucky to be a founder of a tech startup that's got a satellite constellation there, you better solve the biggest problem on Earth.
Well, just a good starting off.
This is my impact.
I actually wanted to go to you, Alex, next, because you've used a word there, Flavia, that's quite an emotive word. You've said it's in your soul. And I remember when you first said that to me, I was like, wow, that's like, we don't talk about soul very often in business. But actually, one of the things that's interesting there is it clearly was a part. You said you've been at this for 39 years, and it's been a part of how you've thought about fleet. I want to turn to you, Alex, and ask a little bit about what impact means to you at XY Sense. Was it always in the DNA of the business that you were building? And if not, how has it sort of come to pass?
Yeah, sure. So while I've been a founder for a long time, I haven't been focusing on impact for 39 years plus. However, at the start with XY Sense, we really were trying to help organizations around the world who were probably pre-pandemic using 60% at any one time of their building. So 40% of it was lying empty. And for enterprises, their building assets is the second or third biggest expense. So they're spending a huge amount of money on this asset that they need to make the most of. So being able to even increase their utilization by 5% is actually globally having a huge impact. And if you think about all the buildings that are being built and the energy expended to build those buildings, that's an incredible thing across the entire world when they really were only using them at 60% occupied. And then you throw a pandemic into it. And right now, we're seeing across the 15 countries we're installed in around the world, about 20 to 30% utilization across the board. And I'd imagine if I asked for a show of hands here, who's actually going into their office for their job 5 days a week, it'd be pretty small. But you compare that to pre-pandemic, maybe the majority of you. So we're talking about millions or even billions of people who are working in workplaces in a different way, and all the energy that's spent in these spaces and all the cost for these organizations, it's really incredible. So being able to make an impact on that can make a huge dent in the world. So that's the way we focused. And for our core value proposition, to be able to help organizations better understand how they can use their space, that aligns really well with that impact question. That by even enabling them to be 1% better, that's going to have a huge impact on the Earth.
But it wasn't always a huge part of XY Sense, right? Like it was a sort of part of the goals of the business, but not a predominant one. Have you seen that shift, and why is that shifting?
It's certainly well aligned with our core value proposition, but from day zero, I mean, we actually thought the best thing that we can do is to make a sensor that's battery powered that you can go put up, you can easily measure, you can understand. But then what we found was for the technology for us to use to be accurate enough, a battery-powered solution meant it couldn't be rechargeable batteries, and to deploy across, say, a bank, that would be 0.5 ton to 1 ton of disposable battery waste every 18 months. And that's just not something that sits well with us as an organization and doesn't sit well with all of the organizations around the world who want to understand their workplaces better. So as a result, I guess the impact on our journey, we started off with something that was maybe not as sustainable, but moved towards a more sustainable solution. And that really aligned well with what our customer base was after, because most of the organizations, including Google on the stage, have very ambitious ESG policies, and a lot of them don't know how to get there. And to be able to help shine a spotlight on how their offices are actually being used and how they can be used better. I mean, a good example, a global company during the pandemic in Europe left their entire buildings on with all their lights switched on throughout the entire lockdown. Like, that's an incredible impact on the negative way on this Earth. So being able to expose all of that and help improve on that is definitely a journey for us. And from day zero, it wasn't there, and we've evolved towards that. And I mean, even our team, they highlighted in terms of engagement that in how we look after impact needed for us to improve upon. And that was one of our biggest initiatives over the last year, and that was actually the biggest improving point for XY Sense. So we're certainly on that journey, but I wouldn't say we're there yet.
Well, no one is, right? That's not the point. We don't have to hold ourselves to some standard of, and I think this is one of the things that's so challenging about this space is often when we start in this area, people hold themselves to the counterfactual of perfection and worry about the gap between where you are and some perfect version of what your business could be doing. When in actual fact, I think the most important counterfactual is doing nothing, right? Like you ask any salesperson and they'll say like the biggest competitor to selling something is actually doing nothing. It's not your actual competitors in the market. And I think this is true for impact as well. The iteration and the learning along the way is what matters. So I'm going to turn to you quickly, Aengus, because in some respects you're the most unusual person on the panel, which is that you're a health tech founder. So it's sort of a given that you care about people, right? You're building health tech solutions. And I want to pick up a question that's also come through on Slido from Matthew, which is about, how do we think about measuring impact? I know it's something you've always cared about from Harrison. So I'd love to hear a bit about the journey and also how your version of impact has informed as you've moved from one vertical to the next in terms of healthcare therapeutics.
Yeah, I mean, I was trained as a medical doctor here in Sydney, and I always had the privilege of seeing what one of the world's best health system can look like. Many of us don't realize it, but in Australia, we have one of the best health systems in the world. With that perspective, I also have a privilege of seeing what health look like everywhere else. Growing up in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, I had to have a lot of families there, and I always had opportunities to go back and see the reality of healthcare. And I remember being a medical student, come back all smug with all my knowledge, right? I remember going on a trip to a community site where a patient would walk through and with signs and symptoms of what looked like a heart failure. And I remember kind of declaring the diagnosis to all the doctors that was there with me at the time, said, this is heart failure. And all the doctors said, Aengus, obviously it's heart failure. That's not the problem. The problem is we just don't have enough capacity. We can't have enough radiologists to x-ray these patients, and we just simply don't have the resources to look after all these people. And the mission for Harrison's was very clear to me, and that is, it's not about building new cutting-edge diagnostic technology or new target cancer therapy. That's very important. But one of the most impactful things you can do on health is about making health more scalable, right? As scalable as software. And the challenge is health is just not very scalable. If you look at health as a technology, it's very slow, right? Typically, we wait 2-3 weeks for an appointment or a diagnosis. It's available under circadian rhythm, so day and night, so doctors go to sleep. So at night and in weekend, there's no health services.
Yep.
It's not very flexible, right? So if tomorrow the pandemic hit and we said we need to x-ray 10 times more patients, there's no 10 times more radiologists. So it takes about 10 years to train a specialist. So from the day that we decided we need more capacity to the day that capacity arrived, the cavalry come 10 years later, right? And the last thing about health is that it's incredibly fragile, right? So people can get sick during the pandemic, doctors can get sick as well, and the capacity goes away. So if I tell you today that your software infrastructure in your tech startup is slow to respond, have latency, is only available during the day, and only some part of the world, you say that's a crazy system, right?
No one would fund that.
No one would fund that, but at the same time, when we say health as a fundamental human right, something that we all deserved, then we accept this system. And its challenge comes down to the fact that it's powered by human. So for us, the impact is how do we create AI system that can do this work, right? This analysis of X-ray, CT, pathology diagnosis, and make it scale like software. So that's the impact that Harrison is looking to do across multiple of its verticals. How do we?
So how did you choose? You've gone from several verticals to the next. How did you choose which ones you want to go after?
Well, I mean, it's, when you look at it, we actually have a very simple prioritization exercise, right? When I first started the company, I went through my lecture note, and there was this very interesting lecture called Major Cause of Death Around the World.
Sounds cheerful.
And there's this table that tells you exactly what people are dying from or suffering from. As you expect, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and then it walked down from there, lung illnesses and other things, right? And we'll say, what is the things that we would do that would create the most impact? And we write it into the founding mission of the company, which is by 2025, we want to touch 1 million patients' lives every day through a collective reach of all the algorithm we developed. And that's very clarifying because that means we walk down the volume game. So X-ray, radiology is the front door of healthcare. That's one of the most common and often first encounter that many of us have to the health system. We're tackling that through the largest volume, which is chest X-ray, followed by CT brain, which is the second most commonly done procedure. And we're now working through pathology, which is the next tier in that. So we're just doing the volume game, and it's a very simple prioritization exercise.
Sounds easy. So I'd love to bring you in, Leah, here, because we've heard from 3 founders of businesses that we at Blackbird are very, very proud to be backers of. And we think are big and going great places, but you work for an organization with over 100,000 people and many millions of customers all over the world. So in many respects, you have more touch points than any other business does that's here yet. How do you think about, and you're a sustainability lead for Google, why is Google thinking about sustainability at all? And how are you going about it?
This is really a big question. So you're right, Google's got about 140,000 employees worldwide, which gives us some coordination headwinds. But the way that we think about it and why we think about it, we've been invested in it for a really long time. So this predates my time at Google by a long ways. I've only been with Google 3.5 years. But Google Cloud specifically, actually all of Google, became carbon neutral in 2007. Which is a ways before.
It's a long time ago.
It's
Carbon neutral in 2007, no one was really doing it back then.
That's right. And I think it's just because people were passionate about it internally. Our executives, of course, are aligned and on board and want to contribute to sustainability goals, but it feels like at Google it's really a grassroots sort of swell. So I guess an example of that is we have a community internally called Anthropocene. So Anthropocene meaning the age of humans. So if you haven't heard of this, the idea is that we've actually had such an impact on the planet that we're in a new geological age, the age of humans, which is what Anthropocene means. Anyway, that's kind of depressing. But the community is voluntary, it's global, and it's got more than 4,000 members. And they run, I'm a member, but I'm not a leader of the community, but they run talks on any topic that you can think of related to sustainability, whether it's personal finance or how can you make an impact personally, or actually they ran a job fair the other day where they said, here are all of our 20% projects. So everybody, I might just very quickly talk about 20% projects. So those still exist at Google where you can actually do something outside of your role for 20% of the time, and you can sign up for any number of sustainability projects. So that's just one way. Can I talk about the energy transition too?
Please do. All
right. So you're probably aware that the energy transition is the biggest impact globally that we can have. So about 73% of greenhouse gas emissions globally come from the energy sector, whether that is building emissions or transportation or just production of energy in general. And along the lines of wanting to be as sustainable as possible, Google is trying to get to running 24/7 on renewable energy directly in every data center that we operate, so local energy on the grid. We actually have been running on 100% renewable energy since 2017, but there's not enough renewable energy on every single grid where we run to make that happen. So actually, there's a huge concerted effort to talk to government agencies and get more power on the grid to do massive power purchases globally. It enables that technology so that we can get to that point. So sorry, that was kind of a long-winded.
No, it's great. I mean, I think what we're seeing here, though, is when you're the scale of Google and you've got intent, you actually then sometimes hit up against the upper end of the scale problem, which is there's only so much you can do without the coordination efforts of what, COP is happening right now, right? And we all know that there's a coordination problem happening around climate change. But it's pretty amazing to see that an organization with the reach of Google is thinking about its opportunities in that space. So I think, when I had a bit of a look at the data recently, and I think the RIAA now estimates that 43% of all assets under management in Australia meet some definition of a responsible investment goal. And that constitutes something in the order of $1.5 trillion. And that's increasing rapidly. And we're very lucky to have, a bunch of our, sovereign wealth funds and super funds here in Australia and in New Zealand doing a lot more in this space in particular. But as the sort of rise of all of this spending, so we've seen the rise of businesses doing more, the rise of sort of assets under management being sort of directed toward those kinds of efforts, it would be remiss of us to forget that there are some people who are skeptical about this agenda. So I thought I would read from a couple of couple of folks that I referenced. So Mike Pence has called ESG a pernicious strategy. The Florida Governor, Ron DeSantis, has legislated against it, and he calls it woke capital. And Elon Musk has taken issue in particular with the ratings agencies on this, and he calls them a scam and run by phony social justice warriors. I think the crux of this debate that particularly is playing out in the United States really relies on one of two things. I think most people don't actually think that doing impact is a bad thing. I mean, there may be some, but they're probably relatively rare. I think people are skeptical either because they believe there's sort of greenwashing or purpose washing happening at such a pace that it's so hard for everyone to distinguish, is this real or is this just marketing? So there's a bit of that sense of skepticism. There are also people who genuinely believe that the purpose of business is to make profit. And we had a question come in from the audience, which was, how do you feel about the idea of, or how do your investors respond, I think was the specific question. How do your investors respond when you say you want to work on impact and they want to push you on profitability? I'd love to hear from the audience, how does this play out for you? Do you believe this to be true? What do you make of this kind of skepticism? Who'd like to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. Mike Pence's comments, for example, only speaking from experience, we don't see anything that's a barrier on a legislative scale or anything like that. I think what Flavia said before around status quo and change is probably the biggest barrier that we see. Because even just a very simple example, we manufacture a sensor, and the plastic enclosure for our sensor, each single one was wrapped in shrink-wrap plastic. And we just asked the question, hey, can we actually use recycled paper and have this in a single box to deliver? And it turned out to be more effective for our supplier, cheaper, and more effective for us. So there was a barrier there, which is just status quo. It's easy to wrap the thing in plastic. In terms of our value proposition, to be able to help organisations use their offices more optimally, if we can do that in a more sustainable way, that's ticking off multiple boxes. So we don't see barriers like legislation or anything like that, or investors pushing back on us, because we can help the world and we can make it a more environmentally friendly one at the same time. So perhaps we're lucky in the fact that our value prop is very much aligned to an ESG world, but we don't see that pushback. In fact, it's more support from everyone.
I was thinking about something in line what you're saying, because I'm not sure who is in the audience here, probably some investors, but I see a lot of young people, so I really hope there are a lot of founders, right? You made me think about two things. The first one is, if you are here to found a global, amazing, impactful, whatever it is company, you probably will need investors. So let me tell you what I've seen in investor land in the past 3 years that is fascinating. So I raised Series A, B, and C, like every year in the past 3-4 years. And before COVID, before everything that happened, and that's normal because VC criteria change and their mission change. Not all of them. But I was fascinated by this 3 years change that 3-4 years ago was all about money, oil, all those things, all the websites were about that.
Gordon Gekko was rife.
Then last year it started crippling in. They changed their website. Right? That we are all about sustainability. But they didn't have an idea exactly what it was. This year, but they are all drilling into, so we're going to solve this problem and sustainability. So,
does that make you cynical, though?
No, it makes me opportunistic. Okay.
A founder?
In a sense that so if there is a company that is a 50 years old company that now suddenly, I would not be that CEO of Saudi Aramco. We're talking about Aramco, where you are an empire that suddenly is attacked of all the angle about their sustainability, and you need to put in place all sort of things. This is not who we are here. Here we are founders of the new companies. So why would you divide impact from revenue? If the investors also will give you money if you do both. So build a business that can change the world, that can have an impact in terms of diversity, education, that can change people's life. Otherwise, what are you doing here?
True.
Because it's not just about how you feel, but it's also they're not going to give you money.
Well, there you go. There's some straight from the horse's mouth advice for founders in the room. But I mean, let's dig into that a little bit, because it's true that we can't do everything all at once. You're all building businesses, even at Leah, at your scale, you've got big challenges, roadmaps as long as everyone's arm, and people vying for resources. Aengus, maybe you can tell us a little bit, like, how do you prioritize? Like, how do you think about, in any given day, any founder has too many things on their plate to be able to work on, and it might feel like a nice to have some of the time, particularly for the parts of impact which aren't deeply embedded in the underlying business model.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree on the perspective of aligning the fundamental optimization of your business with the impact that you seek to create, right? And I always hear this story of the two-step process, right? So you create a two-step company. Step one is make a lot of money. And then step two is trying to create some impacts. And obviously, you know, if that's the case, then sometimes those two things potentially in conflict. But if you can create a business, you know, where the fundamental success of your company hinge on those impacts to happen, and there's many businesses where impacts directly translate to profitability, everything else that you care about, then that's a very meaningful way to lead a company. The other thing I will mention is the financial return and the things that investors would care about is actually a very good set of constraints. And innovation and good ideas typically happens when there's really tight constraint that squeeze on those ideas, right? And then you're forced to create something meaningful. So for example, when people ask about profitability with the technology we build, they ask how easy it is to deploy this AI technology. How much does this cost to run this AI? How far can this technology reach? These are all good fundamentals, right? That if it's in place, will result in you building a technology that create massive impact. So it's not necessarily a bad optimization function.
Yep.
It could be a very productive one also.
So Leah, we've got a question in from the audience which was saying, like, what do you do when it's not convenient to take on a particular initiative? Like, how do you think Google thinks about those particular challenges?
I can't speak for Google as a monolith. I'll just speak from my experience with this. It's been a really interesting place to work because of the way the company was founded. Hopefully this is relevant to you. Things like the 20% projects and quite a bit of autonomy are just built into the culture from the get-go. So I've definitely worked on things where I didn't have full management backing because there are ways they actually can't really say no to a 20% project. They have to have a really good reason to say no to it. And if I can, write a plan that says this is what I think we're going to get out of it, unless there is like a deadline or something really compelling, I basically have the freedom to do that. So I think the culture that you're building as founders is super important. I'm sure there are 20% projects that didn't work out well, but I think in general, when people are really passionate about something and can back it up, it tends to go well for the business. Okay. I guess the other thing that I would say with this is that in my experience looking at impact, there's almost always a benefit to like the traditional business ideas of how do we maximize revenue, how do we reduce risk. You can make those cases, I would say, relatively easily. And I agree with what everyone's been saying about the shift in the last couple of years. Our customers want this. Your customers want this. I tend to work a lot more with traditional enterprise, but there's been a massive shift that I've seen with people talking about ESG. Yep, some of it, even if it is just to propitiate their board members or whatever, at least they're talking about it now, where they weren't necessarily, I'm old, so 10 years ago, they weren't talking about this. And so I think that making the business case for impact is getting easier and easier.
I want to pick up on that, Alex. You told an anecdote when we were sort of prepping for this session about how you've been savvy about using procurement processes as well. Like, we've had some questions come in from the audience about how do you educate customers around a problem that they may not know exists. Maybe you could share a little bit about how you've been doing that at XY.
Sure. So if a big organisation wants to procure a product, their procurement department may have an RFP process where they ask a bunch of questions, and they're all about driving price down to get the best deal for the business. Because we know that organisations have big ESG goals, and a lot of them aren't very far on that journey, and some of them are doing really well on it, but it's still an important aspect for almost every organisation on the planet. We ask questions to help incorporate sustainability from their own ESG policies into the RFP, because there's always a question process. So it's a useful thing to remind them that it's not just all about the dollars, it's also about the impact as well, because they have set their own policies, and we believe strongly that we're a solution that can help them do better in that impact.
Yeah, I mean, we used to be a bit savvy with that at the company I co-founded on Applied, which is all about diversity and inclusion. Sometimes if you just say, hey, I saw on your website that you have a diversity and inclusion policy, does that matter to you still? You know, it creates the environment of like, oh, either we'd forgotten that was something we were going to be aiming for, or it was an initiative, but either way, people don't like to look morally inconsistent. And if you're a savvy salesperson, you can use that to your advantage. So I'd like to kind of pivot a little bit, because we've actually, each of you has picked up on a theme that I've noticed in speaking to founders in our portfolio. When I've sort of said to them, what does impact mean to you, and what are the drivers for it? The two things that have been pretty consistent across the board, regardless of business type, we've got over 100 businesses in our portfolio at Blackbird, ranging from software to space. The two things that have been kind of key is founder intent in some way, shape or form. Like, either going as far as hearing from Flavia that it's in her soul, or Aengus, your story, or even Alex, this sort of quiet sense of like what sits well with us as founders. So that's always been one of them, how in varying degrees of articulation. The other one is, this is really important to our team. Our existing team, like I've had founders show me their Slack channels, and they may be in completely different businesses, and all of a sudden there's like a very rich Slack channel talking about the Adani mine, for example, or diversity and inclusion, or talking about charitable giving, and it's a passion area for a lot of people. So you're all growing businesses, always trying to attract the best talent. Without being cynical about it, does this play into the way you think about your talent strategy?
Of course. Like, something that Leah said that is very clever is that ESG is also about passion, and the new generation. I've learned that the new generation of employees, they don't care about salary, they care about freedom, they care about purpose.
Do you think that's even true with cost of living pressures now? Are you seeing a change?
People don't care anymore. Like, they want to work from home, they want to have their time, then they work, but they want to work for something that has got purpose. And if they don't feel that purpose, and that I feel that I'm not contributing, that will not work for you. That's it. So when we talk about the impact of not doing it, so the impact of doing impact is good, but what's the impact of not doing impact in an environment like that, Employees will walk away. Even when we started focusing on the mining, and even with all the benefits, we really had to talk this through with everyone, even with the software developers. I read something before I started Fleet that really got me, because ESG is not just about the mining or the buildings or the X-rays or whatever it is. It's also about your team, like diversity and all these amazing things. So what do you do? 50% women, and then you need to have that, and then you need to have that. Like, as a founder, it's hard work. So what you learn is just stick with your passion, because the impact is really big. So I'm a CEO, I'm a woman, I'm passionate about diversity in women, I'm passionate about STEM, I'm passionate about diversity in culture. So I read this article that says that the biggest, most interesting scientific breakthrough in the history of time has been done by teams that couldn't really talk well English. That I found fascinating. I'm like, what that means? So it means that when you have people that are different cultures, or it's not English, it's not their main language, and they sit down to solve a problem, they don't understand each other. So they need to go deeper to understand what the other person is doing. And they dig deeper in a problem, instead of being around a group that talks at high level and don't understand the problem. It got me. That was so fascinating. And there were a lot of examples, right? So we tried to build that culture of Fleet and see if it was going anywhere. And we are 92 people now. We got 33 nationalities. This is insane, right? So it is really complex, because you got different religions, different social cues, these different ways. 33 is a lot in a small team. Man, these guys can solve anything. Like, they daily stand-up hard work, because you're like, what did you say? Did you mean that? Did you mean that? I'm not even speaking good English, But you know what I mean? Like, there are some stuff about diversity that is not simply ticking boxes, but it's putting the best brain to solve the biggest problems. And you see the impact. You know, I'm not a feminist. I'm not like we need to be 50% of women because women. We need to be all smart. We need to be the best of what we do, and if you are a woman, it's better. But
I think one thing I'll add into that is, there's the recruitment aspect of that, right? But it's also about the quality of work that your organization can deliver. So I think we work in AI, and one of our AI engineers previously was building an AI system that looked at emotions at slot machines to optimize the return on the slot machine and optimize the win rate.
I recently learned that there is a job. Someone I met recently, their partner, makes the music for slot machines.
Yeah, that's
fantastic.
Like using human psychology.
Exactly, right? And when they come to us, they said, you guys are using very similar technology, but the impacts and the purpose is very different, right? So would you want to be optimizing for people paying for money that they don't have, or delivering healthcare for 1 million patients around the world? And which one of that job do you think that team members will be spending most of his prime time during the day and motivation and energy on, right? So I think one of the really nice aspects about aligning the impacts with your business goal is that it's a great filters. It's a great filters for your investors on making sure that people who do invest in you are investing it on the long term into the similar mission that you have, but also you get the right talents as well, not just the sheer volume of it, but you get the right people.
Actually, that sort of touches on a theme that's come through on a couple of the questions, is this idea of storytelling is a really important part of this. So we've sort of not really stayed in the realm of here's the quantification. And of course, there is a really important role. I mean, on this stage, we've got people with more degrees than I know how to count. So these are people who do care a lot about the specifics and the numbers. And of course, we can sweat the details of how we prove the difference between A and B, and I think we ought to. But you'd be losing half the battle, I think, if you stayed just with the data and you didn't think of ways of storytelling. Like, you wouldn't hire a person just by being able to say, well, this exact number of people were, impacted by our technology today. Telling the story of one person and what their journey was through using Harrison is hugely important. So we're wrapping up very shortly, but we got a really great question in from someone in the audience, sadly anonymously. But they asked actually a question around, for each of you, is there a particular book or resource of any kind, maybe it could be a podcast, that you've read or listened to that's had a big impact on how you think about these particular topics, and if so, what it is? And I'm happy to go first if you want to have a quick think about it.
I'll go quickly.
Please go.
Not a founder. My role, I work with countries all around APAC, and so I read this amazing book called The Culture Map. I don't know if anyone has read that.
What was that again? Sorry.
It's called The Culture Map.
The Culture Map.
It describes communication on 8 different axes around different countries, and you think that there's a lot of overlap. Australia is so similar maybe to the UK or the US, but actually all of our communication styles are totally differently, and it's really easy to misunderstand each other if you don't understand what's important for different cultures, even different countries right next to each other in Europe. So actually, that was a really fascinating book for me, and I like to try to keep it in mind as I'm talking to customers and employees in different parts of the world, so that I don't offend them.
Awesome. Anybody else got something top of mind?
I might say we were talking before around some additional things that Kate's going to be doing to help around with the portfolio on impact. And I said it'd be great to have a book on impact for dummies for myself, because when we're talking about impact, there's so many different interpretations, and education is a big part of understanding how you can make an impact. So I don't have a specific resource that I refer to, but I certainly think that understanding about impact and educating your organisation on how it can be better across all the different facets would be really valuable.
I will buy that book. I already told him.
Either of you got one?
I haven't read any particular book on impact, so
or even just something that shaped your philosophy on all of this.
This is gonna sound really weird.
Go for it. We love it.
No, I read a lot of books, okay? But I love also movies, as we all do. And there is a lot of things that are interesting to watch on Netflix. That
really?
Yeah, and a lot of that are not interesting to watch, so you really need to pick properly. But there is a lot of interesting, so I like all those documentary and story that goes from country to country to show there are a couple of them. You need to look at them. The impact, like the edge stories in the world, like in that country, in that city, they did very well in terms of longevity because they made these 5 choices of impact. There are the blue zones around the world, okay? So there are 10 blue zones around the world where people live 120 years, okay? So they drill into those communities and they try to understand what choices they've done in education, health, communication, city structure, sport, and health for people to live longer. Because at the end of the day, we are in this world to live a long life with the people we love, happy, healthy, and maybe give an impact to the world. So that fascinated me.
What's it called?
The blue zones.
The blue zones.
Okay, something like that. That is so fascinating because it show you the edge cases, that there are edge cases in the world where people, if you make good choices, impact you and everyone else. So if some community are able to do that, why cannot we do it at large scale?
Yeah.
I was having this discussion, that might sound weird, but I lived in the Netherlands for a long time, and there was 6 months in the Netherlands when I lived that there were not people in prisons for 6-7 months. I know this is completely different, okay? It's maybe not tech. But so this is the only place in the world, that for 7 months there were no one in prisons. You know that this year, South Australia became with more renewable energy place in the world on top of Denmark for the first time. Why? I'm from Adelaide, so. but why? So I think when you start edge cases, you start people's choices on impact. I like that.
Awesome. Angus, any final things?
I mean, I actually would prefer a movie. Maybe many of you guys watch it. It's called Elysium. And it's talk about the future where people live in space and all that. But what I was fascinated by is in that movie there was a machine that people can sit on, a scan will sweep, and a diagnosis pop up on all the things that is wrong. It's interesting because that's the tech that I'm striving to build. But that movie actually informed a lot of the philosophy behind Harrison, because that is a very good example of what happened when the great impacts get created, but it's only available for a selected few.
Right.
And it's a big reminder that as founders and leaders of the future, whenever there's potential for great positive impact, there's also a risk of a negative one, a big one. And it's a big responsibility that all we have in terms of what we prioritize every day, what choices we make with our product. And that's a reminder that I always have with all the power we have as founders and entrepreneurs of the future.
Well, I couldn't wrap it up better than that. I really want to thank every one of my fabulous panelists for talking to us today about impact, and thank you.
Thank you.